Hi there, my name is Ashley, and I am presenting chapters 18 and 19 on qualitative research. So, qualitative research methods attempts to tap the deeper meanings of particular human experiences and are intended to generate theoretically richer observations that are not easily reduced to numbers. Seldom will you approach qualitative research with precisely defined hypotheses to be tested, but instead it will fluctuate between observation, conclusions, and revisions. Qualitative research, like all research, is unlikely to be a linear process. This methodology is used to create theories with the overarching purpose being to discover why and how certain behaviors and patterns exist. There are four common paradigms in qualitative research. The first is naturalism, which observes people in their natural settings and reports their stories as they tell them and not as the ethnographer understands them. So an ethnography is a study that focuses on detailed and accurate description rather than explanation. Grounded theory begins with observations and looks for patterns, themes, or common categories, and emphasizes an inductive process. Once a pattern is identified, researchers will typically seek out similar cases referred to as theoretical sampling. Once no new insights are being generated based on similar cases, researchers will move on to a different type of case, repeat the cycle until concluding that further seeking will not alter these findings. The third is participatory action research. And in this, the researcher's function is to serve as a resource to those being studied, which is typically a disadvantaged group, and as an opportunity to act effectively in their own interest. In this paradigm, the disadvantaged group defines their problems, the remedies desired, and they take the lead in designing the research that will help them realize their aims. Since traditional research paradigms can be viewed as elitist, reducing subjects to objects, this paradigm equates knowledge with power and places this tool in the hands of those being studied so that they can be the proprietors of the change they seek. The fourth paradigm is case studies, and this is an idiographic examination of a single individual, family, group, organization, community, or society. Its primary purpose is description, although attempts at explanation are acceptable as well. So an example of this would be studying the first effort to provide case management in a rural area, or a mixed methods case study approach, which combines qualitative and quantitative method using single case designs. So for my single subject research paper, my topic is smoking cessation using the nicotine patch. My participant was successful in quitting smoking. Which means that the nicotine patch is effective. But if I were to employ a mixed methods approach, I would have been able to better identify if other variables influence the positive outcome. For example, when her smoking urges increased, what stressors influenced this? Has she started any new activities like walking that reduced her desire to smoke? I could have utilized a client log so the participant could journal triggers that are relevant to her smoking urges. So the strengths and weaknesses of qualitative research are pretty straightforward. For strength, it's the depth of understanding. The ability to study subtle nuances and attitudes and behaviors is a really powerful component in research. Flexibility, your ability to modify the research design at any time is very helpful, especially when you discover new things. The cost is relatively inexpensive depending on the type of research you are doing. You could simply do it with a research and a notepad and a pencil, but it can get expensive if you need high-tech recording equipment. So the weaknesses are subjectivity. Measurements are often very personal and can be linked to the researcher's own judgments. Generalizability. Observations and measurements may not be easily replicated by another independent researcher because of the personal judgment. A full picture comprehensive view of subject matter is not readily applicable to all similar cases as compared to rigorous sampling and standardized measurements of quantitative research methods. And again, that's because of researcher judgment. So sample selection can be inescapably biased. For example, you may only speak to people designated by an organization to deal with the public. So evaluation of qualitative studies is going to focus primarily on trustworthiness, and to do so there are three different paradigms that are used in the standards associated with them. So the first is contemporary positivist, and this maximizes objectivity and minimizes the distorting influence of reactivity, researcher bias, and respondent biases by using one or more of the following strategies. So prolonged engagement is to ensure that the researcher has been submersed in the culture, also referred to as going native, for long enough to yield high quality data. Triangulation seeks corroborations between two or more resources for data interpretations. Peer debriefing and support. Teams of investigators meet regularly to give feedback, emotional support, and ideas. Negative case analysis is to look for case anomalies that conflict with research to ensure validity. Member checking is to check with participants to see if the research observations and interpretations ring true and have meaning to them. And auditing is when an impartial researcher evaluates the paper trail and all the research materials to ensure the highest level of validity was maintained. The second is social constructivists, and the standard here is to appraise whether multiple subjective realities are adequately depicted according to these criteria, which is member checking, fitness or transferability, which is the provision of thick background information with sufficient detail about the research context, setting, and participants, and again, triangulation. The third paradigm is empowerment. So you want to check with the participants and appraise whether the study empowered them. Did it evoke action to the effect desired? And you also want to obtain and report participant testimonials suggesting a change in their views about what they were being researched for. So the roles of the observer, there are types and styles. The first is the complete participant, and this is when you're seen only as a participant and you must learn to behave as one, even though you know that you are the researcher. Participant as observer, this is when there's a clear understanding that you are doing research, but you still participate. Observer as participant, you identify as the researcher. You may participate, but there's no pretense that you are actually a participant. It is clear that you are a researcher and you're here to observe. And the complete observer is somebody who does not become in any way part of the social process. You are just observing. And I would, an example of this is when we went to an AA meeting, if that's where you went to for the research recovery model for our 503 class. So there's 3 different styles that you can maintain. Ideally, you want a balance of all 3, but as you will see, that's pretty difficult to maintain, but it is possible. The edit perspective, it maintains objectivity as an outsider, allowing you to raise questions about the culture observed. The emic perspective is trying to adopt the beliefs, attitudes, and other points of view shared by the studied culture. Reflexivity is when a researcher continually reflects on how their own experiences, assumptions, and biases might be influencing the work. And this is true even for clinical social work, where you're always checking your own personal bias when interacting with the client. So specific methods, qualitative interviewing. Interviewing itself is an interaction between an interviewer and a respondent where there's a general plan of inquiry, but not a specific set of questions. It's typically open-ended, and ideally you want it to be highly structured because that reduces bias, but it also can interfere with the natural flow of a conversation. So there's several types of interviewing styles, which is informational conversational interview, which is unplanned and unanticipated. You have standardized open-ended, which is written out in advance to be asked exactly as written. You have life history, life story, which follows the naturalist paradigm and focuses on oral history interviews. Feminist methods, which focuses on the well-being of women in a historically male-dominated society, typically through ethnography and oral history. And then you have focus groups, and which is group interviewing, typically utilized to assess whether a new social program is needed. So some of the advantages of focus groups, which is the most common qualitative interviewing style that maybe people know, is that it's inexpensive, it generates speedy results, and it offers flexibility for probing. But some of the disadvantages are that the focus group may not be representative of the population the research is geared towards. Group dynamics can influence the results, and large amounts of less systematic data are more difficult to evaluate. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.